Hi, this is Dr. Swapna and I welcome you to your Learn Lab. If you are an IGNOU student looking for help in your studies, then you have reached the right place. Here, we have lecture videos on different core and elective subjects of important IGNOU courses. We aim to help you ace your exams. So hit subscribe to our channel and as you watch, make sure to like and share too. Come and join me on this beautiful learning journey.
In this video, we are doing the last unit of the third block, that is criminal psychology, and this unit is titled correctional psychology. So this field, that is correctional psychology, it brings in two whole different worlds of psychology and the correctional system. So we'll see how psychology plays a role in prisons, courtrooms, interrogations, rehabilitation, and even in death penalty cases, right? So let's look what are we going to study. By the end of this class, you should be able to understand three broad things. First of all, understand the meaning and scope of correctional psychology. In short, what exactly correctional psychology means, how psychology is applied once a person enters the criminal justice system. Secondly, explain how psychological principles are applied in correctional settings, places like prisons, remand homes, juvenile homes, and rehabilitation centers. And third, describe the roles of forensic psychologists uh, in prisons, courts and trials, interrogation and confession, death penalty, trials and appeals, sexual harassment and discrimination cases, dealing with persons in conflict with law. So basically, think of this video as a journey through the criminal justice system guided by psychology. What is correctional psychology? So, correctional psychology is a subfield where psychological principles, theories, and techniques are applied within the justice and correctional system. Why? To classify offenders, to diagnose mental health conditions, to provide treatment, to manage behavior, to reduce recidivism or repeat offending, and improve public safety. So, correctional psychology simply means using psychological knowledge to understand, manage, treat, and rehabilitate offenders. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone has committed a violent crime. Why did they do it? Was it impulse control, childhood trauma, psychosis, or maybe substance abuse, or lack of coping skills? A correctional psychologist tries to find these answers. Their job is not to punish, their job is just to understand behavior, identify psychological issues, and help reduce the chance of the person committing the crimes repeatedly. So, the goal is not just to keep the society safe today, but also to prevent crimes in the future. So, this is what is correctional psychology all about. Psychologists work in correctional settings in many ways. They help in rehabilitation, maybe teaching social skills or coping strategies, how to integrate back into the society after being in the criminal system. Secondly, they provide mental health care, which is extremely important because prisons have high rates of depression, anxiety, and even psychosis. We can imagine what life inside a prison might be like, right? So, this is another role where psychologists have a function or something to do. Thirdly, they do behavior change programs like anger management or providing therapy for substance abuse, all of these. They also perform risk assessment like is this person likely to reoffend, is this person a harm to society once this person goes out, right? What kind of treatment is required for this kind of a person? All of this risk assessment, assessing the risks and how to mitigate those risks. Finally, prison adjustment, they help the inmates or the person who has been sent to prison to adjust to life in prison, right? Imagine a whole person dedicated just to make sure that a person gets adjusted in prison life, right? Yeah, that is a function of correctional psychologist. So, correctional psychology is not only about mental illness, it is also about helping people behave better, learn better, and eventually live better once they come out of the prison life. So, these are the contributions of correctional psychologists. The purpose of correctional psychology is something very human. It aims to understand mental health issues in offenders, why they behave in a way they do. It also aims to provide treatment and rehabilitation, not just medication but also therapy. Manage incarcerated individuals effectively, which means help manage the behavior of people or the person who's already in the prison. For example, like reducing aggression or reducing chances of self-harm, all of these. So incarcerated individual here means simply the person who has been convicted and sent to jail. Reduce likelihood of reoffending. This is reducing recidivism. This is the term for repeating the offense. So, the purpose of correctional psychology is also to prevent crimes from repeating when the person is released and ensure safety. Maintain safety for inmates, staff, and also the society. So, people within prison and outside the prison. So, this field supports justice system by bridging psychology and law. So, correctional psychology is like the psychological backbone of the correctional system. Next question is, who can work in correctional psychology? So, interestingly, there is no single specific degree called correctional psychology. So, people come from different areas like clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist, developmental psychologist, social or community psychologist, and even forensic psychologist. So, what matters is the person's ability to assess behavior, diagnose disorders, and work with people in such challenging environments, right? So, their roles often begin post adjudication after the court has passed initial judgments, right? So, this is a very challenging work, and there is no specialized degree, and people from any of these branches can work in this field of correctional psychology. Areas of work. Correctional psychologists work in many settings. Some of these include prisons and jails, remand homes, juvenile homes. These are places where anyone who has done a crime but is below the legal age of an adult or 18 years in India. So such people are sent in juvenile homes instead of prisons. Then probation offices, courts, rehabilitation centers, and forensic mental health units. These are all the areas where correctional psychologists typically work in. For example, as I told you, a juvenile home might focus more on counseling and skills, while a prison psychiatrist mostly focuses on dealing with severe mental illness or even depression and stress of living inside a prison. And different settings require different needs from the same field or the same professional, right? Yeah, so these are the different areas of work of a correctional psychologist. Let's now talk about the mental health of prisoners, because honestly it's a very silent crisis, right? I understand that the person deserves to be there, but I don't know, there's a very dicey subject, so I don't have a firm opinion on this. But yeah, many prisoners come with a lot of psychological baggage, and these include like depression, maybe due to separation from the near and dear ones, or depression due to imprisonment, anxiety about their future or how they are going to survive in the prison, then aggression, especially if the person is a violent offender, substance abuse issues, impulse control problems, or psychotic disorders like hallucinations and delusions, and then adjustment disorders, especially for the first time inmates. So, imagine someone who has never been in a prison. Suddenly, they are in an overcrowded space, and such overcrowded space with poor facilities and strict routines, no privacy, and there is always a constant threat. Anyone would struggle, right? Specifically when they are separated from family and near and dear ones. So all these situations can very well worsen the mental health situation of any person. So just because the person has committed a crime, do they deserve it or not? That is a debate. So I am right now on neither side of this debate. I'm still studying it. Going forward, let's look at what kind of environment is there in prisons. So prisons are often overcrowded. They have poor ventilation, poor sanitation, inadequate food and water, limited health care, fear and threat of violence. So obviously prison is a place where people are sent for punishment, right? It's not a five-star hotel, obviously. So prisons will be overcrowded, basic sanitation may be poor, ventilation may be inadequate, there may not be any windows, food might not be nutritious enough, access to healthcare can also be limited, and any moment any fight can break out between people, right? Under such conditions even mentally healthy individuals can kind of come down. So just imagine what happens to someone who already has mental health challenges. So that's why correctional psychology is not optional but essential in the prison environments. So these conditions can deteriorate mental health rapidly, and prisons have a high percentage of mentally ill inmates than general population. Now we look at the different roles of forensic psychologists, and the first role will be in prison. Inside the prison, these are the multiple roles that they play. They perform assessment, they do diagnosis, they treat, they do behavior management, they help in rehabilitation, and they also provide expert evidence. So you can think of the correctional psychologist as a whole team. The same person doing being the behavior expert and being the rehabilitation coach all in one, right? So we'll look at one by one of these roles of a correctional psychologist in the prison. So assessment is the first step for any forensic psychologist in prisons. So they assess things like competency to stand trial, criminal responsibility, mental health evaluation, substance abuse assessment, and suicide risk assessment. So they'll check whether the person is mentally competent to stand trial. Can they understand what is happening around them? Do they even realize what exactly they have done? Did they commit the crime consciously or during a mental health episode? Do they have substance abuse issues because of which they have committed that particular crime? They were not in their real sense when this was happening. Are they at risk of harming themselves? So sometimes it may happen that people might say, or someone who has been found out to have committed a crime, they might say that they were hearing voices telling them to hurt someone or maybe hurt themselves. So this kind of things require immediate psychiatric evaluations, right? So this is the first step of assessment. So once assessment is done, the next step is treatment. This could mean psychotherapy, counseling, crisis intervention, medication or support, and even trauma therapy, which includes treating psychosis, depression, PTSD, and all of this. So, so many inmates in jail, they have this post-traumatic stress disorder from childhood abuse or traumatic crime experiences. So in such cases, counseling helps them to process their emotions. So diagnosis and treatment is the second step. Then in the third, we have behavior management programs. This includes anger management, impulse control program, emotional regulation, and also stress reduction. So we can add here emotional regulation and stress reduction. So rehabilitation is a more long-term thing, and so it requires skills training and reintegration planning. So this here prepares the prisoner for a life outside, like skills training, communication skills, vocational skills, social skills, so that a well-prepared prisoner is less likely to re-offend once the person goes out into the society. So reintegration planning means to how to introduce that person back into the society, right? So that they can now cope up with the social pressures and social pressures and social expectations and commit to social laws and not harm the society. Sometimes psychologist also gives expert evidence to courts for reports for parole, whether the person should be allowed to go out for parole, if the person is fit to be sent out for parole. Both of these things, the report is given by a correctional psychologist. Mental illness documentation. If the person is mentally ill, if yes, then what is the extent, what is the severity, is this person a danger to the society and the person himself or herself. All these reports are given by the forensic psychologist who is working in prisons for correctional psychology. Then they also recommend for treatment or transfer. Either the person can be treated within the prison or can be transferred to a mental health institute. So, forensic psychologist would be telling whether the inmate is severely depressed, if the person needs to transfer to a mental health unit, or if the person is suitable for parole. These reports can influence important legal decisions taken by the court. After the role in prison, the next role is in court and trials. So, in courts and trials, the roles played by a correctional psychologist include providing expert testimony, providing psychological evidence, clarifying defenses, and providing scientific reliability. We'll look at these one by one. Okay, so the first function is expert testimony. So, a correctional psychologist will be telling the court what the mental state of the accused was when they were committing the crime. Whether they have they have the mental ability to understand the proceedings, the legal proceedings that is happening, and whether the accused have the mental ability to defend themselves. If based on all of these, the court would be taking a decision on the accused, and if the punishment should be given, if at all yes, what kind of punishment should be given, whether the person is, whether the person should be punished or not in the first place. All of this based on the expert testimony given by a correctional psychologist. Secondly, they also provide psychological evidence based on the test results, the test that they have conducted. Could be intelligence test or could be personality test, right? And they can provide their behavioral observations, what they have observed about the behavior of the accused, the profiles and risk assessments, whether the person is going to be a risk to self or to society. So, an example would be a correctional psychology telling the court that I have performed an intelligence test on this person, and based on the results, I am concluding that, or I have concluded that this person does not understand the consequences of their actions. They are not capable of understanding the consequences, right? So, this kind of testimony helps the court to make informed decisions about the individual. Next would be clarifying defenses. So, sometimes mental state becomes a legal defense, right? So a psychologist helped to clarify whether the person was intoxicated at the time of crime, which means they had consumed substances like alcohol or any other drugs and they were not in their right state of mind. So was the person intoxicated, or was the person insane at the time of the act? Or was there any lack of intent? Means the person did not intentionally want to commit the crime, but it just happened and it is circumstantial. Right? So they are going to help in determining all of these. So here the court is going to question the qualifications, the scientific reliability, the validity of the test and peer reviewed evidence. The court can also not take everything at face value, right? So court will also be questioning back about the qualifications of the person, about the scientific reliability of the defenses given, the validity of the tests that have been conducted on the accused, and peer reviewed evidence, which means the evidences will be reviewed. The evidences provided by a correctional psychologist would be reviewed by other people in the same field to check whether they also come up with the same inferences. That's how we are doing reliability check of the evidences. So for instance, someone having a schizophrenic episode might act violently without intention or awareness, right? So all of this clarification is given by a psychologist or a correctional psychologist, which the court might also question just to make sure that the person is giving the right information. So yeah, as I told you that the courts are not going to take the testimony given by any psychologist on face value. There are certain standards that should be maintained for an expert testimony, and according to the accepted standards given by the American Educational Research Association 1999, the test must have a general acceptance, which means the test that has been conducted by the correctional psychologist on the accused should be generally accepted. It should have high reliability and validity. This we know is a characteristic of any good psychological test, right? There should be clear documentation. It should have been peer reviewed, which means reviewed by other people in the same field or experts in the same field. And it should have been standardized. We have already studied standardization in BPCC 105, right? So I hope you remember that. So the psychologist must be able to defend the tools used during cross-examination. So once again, the courts, they just don't accept random opinions. So psychologists must rely on scientifically valid tools, and these tools should be reliable, standardized, and also peer reviewed. So they must defend their assessment during cross examination, so that every conclusion must be backed by acceptable evidences. Next, we look at the role of a correctional psychologist in interrogation and confession. So, interrogation is usually done by the police, but forensic psychologists are also involved when confessions appear coerced. Coerced means forced. There is possibility of false confessions. The court has asked for an expert assessment, or a mental illness affects ability to cope with interrogation, right? So in any of these cases where the confession seems forced, or the person is mentally weak, or the person shows signs of trauma, the confession doesn't match behavior, right? In all of these cases, the forensic psychologist or the correctional psychologist steps in. For example, minors are extremely vulnerable to giving false confessions due to pressure or even fear, right? So here the psychologist must determine, was the confession voluntary? Was the suspect forced or coerced? Is the confession truthful or false? So we know that confession means someone coming out and telling that yes, I did it, or I saw this, right? These confessions are powerful evidences, sometimes even stronger than eyewitness testimony, right? Eyewitness is saying that I saw someone else do this. So here the person is saying that I have done this. So it has to be checked thoroughly to make sure that it was not forced, or the person was not in the right senses, or the person falsely thinks that the person has done a crime when the person has not, right? So yeah, all the interrogations should be checked very thoroughly. So we have different types of confessions here. We have voluntary confessions, where the person confesses on their own that yes, I have done this crime. There is coerced compliant confessions. So here the person confessed to escape pressure or interrogation. They'll say that they'll be tired of the interrogation and the pressure, and they might end up saying yes, I have done it, just leave me alone, right? That is coerced compliant confession. Then we have coerced internalized confession, where the person actually start believing that they have committed the crime when they have not. So they might, for example, in case of a murder, the person might have hit someone, the person might have fell and gone unconscious, but then person might not have been dead by then. But this person who has hit believes that yes, I killed the person, when the person might not have been dead by then, right? This is an example of coerced internalized confession, where the person starts believing that they have committed the crime when they have not. Then finally we have false confessions. This could be due to pressure, fear, exhaustion, or even suggestibility, right? So psychologist helps to identify what type of confession was given by the individual. Next, we see the role of correctional psychologist in death penalty, where a person has been sentenced to death. So here, psychologists are involved in assessing the mental state of individuals on death row, evaluating the intellectual disability, determining competency for execution, reviewing past psychological reports, giving expert opinion during appeals, assessing trauma, abuse, and mitigating factors, right? So here, the psychologist would be examining mental illness, intellectual disability, the trauma history of the person, and competency for execution. So if someone is severely intellectually disabled, such person cannot be legally executed. So these kind of reports are given by the correctional or the forensic psychologist involved. So the reports given by a forensic psychologist or the correctional psychologist can help the courts to decide on sentencing, clemency. Clemency means whether the death sentence should be not given. I mean, showing mercy to the accused, right? Clemency is basically show mercy. And would be commutation of death penalty, which means changing the death penalty to some other form of punishment, maybe another 10 or 14 years of imprisonment, right? So clemency means giving mercy, commutation means changing the death penalty to something else. So the reports of the psychologist would help the court to decide how to go ahead with the person. So this is the role in death penalty. Next would be the role of the correctional psychologist in sexual harassment cases and discrimination. So forensic psychologists here work with survivors by providing trauma assessment, therapeutic intervention and skills training. So in these cases the role of the psychologist shift from offenders to survivors. So till now the psychologist was working with the offenders, right? So in this role the psychologist would be working with the survivor of a crime. Here they assess the level of trauma, help the person with post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, they provide therapy, they teach coping skills, they also support to rebuild confidence, right? So we'll look at each of these in detail. So the first role in sexual harassment and discrimination cases with the survivor would be assessment of trauma. This involves checking for PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, checking for depression, dissociation from reality or surroundings, or emotional distress. So here the forensic psychologist is also involved in providing therapeutic interventions. Like the common therapies would include psychodynamic theory. We know what is psychodynamic theory. Trauma focused CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. This also we have studied. And EMDR. This is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which means the person is asked to look from sideways to sideways while talking about the memories or the what happened, the experiences, right? So it is believed that when the person is talking about the experiences while engaging the eye in different kinds of movements, the severeness of the memory comes down. So that is EMDR. So these are the different therapeutic inventions given by the forensic psychologist. Then there is a 5-phase model of treatment where a forensic psychologist helps a survivor of sexual harassment or discrimination, and these 5 steps include assessment and education, rapport and strengths, cognitive intervention, emotion focused intervention, and trauma narrative. We'll discuss in this detail. So just before that, let's just look at the last function that they do in this case, that is skill training, providing anger management, helping them to be more assertive and helping them to develop coping skills, right? So these are the functions of what do you say, correctional psychologist in while working with survivors of sexual harassment. Let's look at the 5-phase model, each of these stages. So each of the stage helps survivors regain control over their memories and well-being. This is a very structured model for treating trauma survivors. So in phase 1, there is assessment and education, where the person understands the symptoms, the trauma history, the strengths of the survivor, and helps the survivor by providing psycho education. So basically here the therapist is simply listening and understanding what the person is going through. So this is assessment and education. Secondly, we have rapport and strengths. This is a very important stage after a person has gone through a trauma. So this helps in building trust with the psychologist and also identifying the coping abilities. Alright. The third phase is cognitive intervention. So in this phase, the psychologist is going to help them deal with distorted thoughts like maybe self-blame, right? So here The psychologist would be addressing distorted beliefs, guilt, and self blame that the survivor may have. That, feelings like, if I hadn't done this way, it wouldn't have happened, I could have done something differently. All these thoughts doesn't make any sense after, everything has happened. So, in cognitive intervention, psychologists would be helping the person deal with all the distorted beliefs and thoughts, guilt, and self blame the person has. Phase 4, we have emotion focused work. So, this helps the survivors to process their fear, their shame, their anger, and their grief. Finally, there is a trauma narrative phase where the person creates a guided narrative of the event. Right? The survivor will be creating a guided new narrative of the whole event, which reduces their emotional charge. Right? So simply, this is a guided retelling of the traumatic event to reduce the distress. So in the first step, the psychologist listens to the person, understands what the person is going through, what the person's thought processes, and try to help them, give them psychoeducation. Secondly, the psychologist builds rapport and trust with the person and helps in identifying their strengths or coping abilities. Third, they provide cognitive intervention, where cognitive intervention means working with the distorted beliefs, guilt, and self blame. Then there is emotion focused work, where the survivor is helped to process anger, fear, shame, and grief. And finally, trauma narrative, where there is a guided retelling of the traumatic event to reduce the distress. So this is the 5-phase model of treating a survivor. Next role in correctional psychology is dealing with persons in conflict with law. So, persons in conflict with law refers to juveniles or offenders who are below the legal adult age, first time offenders, repeat offenders, mentally ill offenders, victims who become offenders, individuals requiring rehabilitation. So, each category here requires different approaches. So here, the kind of support that psychologists provide includes assessment, treatment, counseling, rehabilitation programs, behavior modification, risk evaluation, and post-release support, which means after releasing the person from the prison, any further mental support that is provided. For example, a juvenile offender may receive emotional regulation training and social skills development so that that person can get safely reintegrated into the society. Finally, we have the ethical guidelines. So, based on the 1991 specialty guidelines, which was updated later, forensic psychologists must ensure confidentiality, impartiality, accuracy, competence, scientific validity, ethical documentation, and respect for human rights. So, their works affect legal decisions. Hence, ethics is very critical. Ethics is otherwise also extremely important here because the psychologist's decisions and testimony will impact someone's freedom and life. So, they must ensure all of this: confidentiality, accurate assessment, impartiality, scientific validity, and respect for human rights, because a wrong assessment can ruin someone's life. Right? So, this was all about this unit. And what have we learned? What correctional psychology means, what is the mental health issues faced in prisons, and roles of the psychologist in prisons, courts, interrogations, death penalty, sexual harassment and rehabilitation cases, and how psychology helps the justice system function more humanely. And finally, the ethical guidelines.
Thank you all for learning with me. If you found the video helpful, make sure you let me know by hitting the like button. Make sure you share the video with your friends too. Subscribe to make sure that you don't miss out on any of the new videos. You can reach me by simply dropping a comment. See you in the next one. Till then, happy learning.